Thank you for giving me this opportunity to go back and be reminded of my own leadership years and the mentor I had in Mother St. John Fontbonne's story of her service of leadership in the 19th century. At the recent UISG meeting in Rome, Sister Teresa Meyer reminded all leaders of religious congregations that we are called to be sowers of prophetic hope. She said, the quest for the future must begin by remembering that we need to enter the mystery of our own memory, to tell and retell our stories, our founding stories. Since we are all of the Joseph story, I would like to take these few moments to remember with you some very precious parts of the life of Mother St. John Fontbonne. It might be helpful for your task these days as you're gathered together as leaders. As the leaders of congregations, you all hold the stories of the women who carried the visions, the dreams, and the hopes to fruition. You are walking along the same path, and now as you hold the responsibility for seeing the congregation through this period, you also hold the responsibility for encouraging and empowering the new generation with their hopes and dreams. Listening, supporting, encouraging, empowering, forming, and financing are all part of your role in realizing their desires for their preferred future. These women need the leadership's time and presence to be heard, to be encouraged, and to be challenged. During the French Revolution, there was a young woman named Charlotte Dupin who was arrested with her pastor. She was working for the pastor. And while she was in prison, she saw how horrible the conditions were for the prisoners. And when she came out of prison, she decided she was going to give her life over to taking care of prisoners. She had a following, and they were very faithful to her. And after she died, the leader, a woman named Jeanne Juliard, wanted to organize this group into a religious congregation because she felt it needed so much more involvement than what ordinary lay people could do at that time. She went to the cardinal, and the cardinal blessed the ministry, but he did not approve of the idea of forming a congregation. And he told her instead to go to Mother St. John, that she could take them in and form them, which is what Jeanne did. Of course, for Mother St. John at that moment, she was involved in expansion and establishing communities, etc. So this was asking a lot of her, but she did accept in the end, and she received the group of women that wanted to be formed as sisters. Part of the group went into the novitiate, and the other part kept the ministry going. And then after the first group was formed, the second group went in to be formed, and the others returned to the ministry. They stayed with Mother St. John for over 20 years. And after that period of time, Mother St. John was feeling that it was time for them to really establish their own congregation, because the Sisters of St. Joseph, this was not their primary ministry. Mother St. John felt they were focused more on education and health care. So she encouraged them to establish themselves as a congregation, which they did, and they became known as the Marie Joseph Congregation. Mother St. John, when these sisters left to establish their congregation, went to her own congregation and said to the members, if any of you want to join in doing this ministry, you can go with the Sisters of Marie Joseph. Some 250 sisters left and joined the Marie Joseph congregation. You can imagine what that must have cost Mother St. John, because she was in the midst of a great expansion and establishing new congregations and new community houses. But she did not, she just felt it was the right thing. She had to do this. She felt that the congregation entrusted to her existed uniquely to be of service to the neighbor and for the glory of God. So she did not cling to keeping anyone within her own congregation. But as leaders, you can imagine the cost of that. This was 2 years before she withdrew from her own leadership as congregational leader. When she finished her service, there were over 3,000 members, and she had established more than 240 houses and founded at least 7 or 8 other congregations of Sisters of St. Joe. This is surely a story worth noting as we continue to hope and plan for a different kind of future for religious life. Mother St. John listened deeply to the movements of the Spirit in her personal and religious life. That's why I believe when she and her counselors made decisions for their next step, they acted swiftly and with determination because they were rooted in God's desire. It seems those who surrounded Mother St. John as sisters were always willing to respond to her decisions because she not only consulted her God, she also always sought to place the sisters where they could best utilize their gifts and talents. She made it her duty to discover what strengths and abilities the members had. Consequently, they were always willing to do whatever she asked of them. In establishing the Sisters of St. Joseph in the Diocese of Lyon, Mother St. John had many new members, young women seeking to enter, but she also had many who had been religious prior to the Revolution. This latter group was more difficult to deal with because they had been members who lived in independent communities with no central house. They would be resistant to becoming part of a congregation organized as Mother St. John had, satellite houses with a central house overseeing all the other houses, because they prized their independence. They did not trust a centralized organization. Here, Mother St. John would travel incognito to visit the sisters and would talk with them, listen to their fears, and build a rapport with them, only for the sisters to discover that this was their leader who cared about them and their concerns. In the end, she won them over. Now, I'd say that's knowing how to build trust and love for her sisters. We need to keep these stories close to our hearts and minds. After reading her life a number of times, I am still discovering the kind of leader she was. I felt she approached her service in a manner that did not make concerns and issues a problem. I learned to say, in looking at her life, it's not a problem. Only solutions here. And she never went to leadership school. Imagine that. She learned to use her resources well, and she listened. I think we need to really take time to review her years in leadership. Remember, after the Revolution, she lived at home with her family for about 10 years. She had no idea if and when she would ever return to community. She and her sister did visiting the sick, taught catechism, ministered to those in need, and then she waited. Waited until God spoke through the cardinal, who called her to establish the Sisters of St. Joseph in St. Etienne in 1807. That was a long wait for God to speak to Mother St. John. She was alone when she went to the group of women who had been formed in a monastic lifestyle. The cardinal gave her orders to form these women to be Sisters of St. Joseph. She had no team of formators or of community members to back her up. She was alone. By her genuineness, she won them over to understand that they could not lead a rigid life of monasticism and be apostolic women. She won them over by gently and firmly leading and modeling. They became known as the pearls of the congregation. They became very faithful to her. This is another point for you to ponder. It had to be a pretty difficult moment to establish the Sisters of St. Joseph alone. As difficult a moment as religious life at this time is, with all the letting go, the diminishment, the dying, the rising, we don't know what that rising will yet be. These new members are here, very desirous of living the charism. They are not alone. They have members at the local level, and they have a global community also. Why do we worry about what religious life the Sisters of St. Joseph will become? Look again at our foundresses, beginning with Mother St. John. She lived the tension between the now and the not yet of the charism. And look at what emerged. All of us, for more than 200 years. We will rise again. Tell the stories, share the hope, dance into a new life. We will rise again as God desires. We simply continue to do the work we are all doing with the confidence and determination of our foremothers. Let's mount up and go about our business of serving with the same joy and serenity we had when there were great numbers in our membership. We're all saying today, it isn't about the numbers. Then, that being so, you, the leaders of 2019, lead on, holding the tension between the now and the not yet of the charism. And I end with Maxim 66 of Father Madai. Be courageous to undertake what God wants of you, and constant to persevere in what you undertake, never giving up whatever difficulties occur and whatever obstacles may be placed on your path, unless you become totally powerless against them. Thank you, and many blessings to you all.